My sister stole my millionaire fiancé and married him. 7 years later, she stood in front of me and bragged that she had everything: the million man, the money, the mansion, the perfect life. I looked at her, smiled calmly, and asked, "Have you met my husband yet?" There are moments in life when you are walking towards something you dread, something you have spent years trying not to face. And yet a strange calm settles over you, because some part of you knows the universe is about to reveal a truth so clean, so brutal, and so undeniable that nobody in the room will be able to pretend anymore. That was exactly how I felt standing at my mother's funeral. My heart was crushed with grief, but underneath that grief was a disturbing stillness as I waited for my sister to arrive. It had been 7 long years since Odora, my own younger sister, stole Darius Rowan, my millionaire fiancé, the man I once believed would become my entire future. I had not truly faced either of them since the day my life split in half. But when they finally walked through the doors, Odora wearing her elegant black dress, flaunting that huge diamond ring and her same smug smile, she had no idea who was standing beside me. And believe me, the look on her face when she realized who I had married was worth every second of silence I had kept. My mother had always been the center of our family, the kind of woman who could make even a small house outside Boston feel like the safest place in the world. She was the glue that held all of us together, even when the rest of us were too stubborn, too proud, or too wounded to admit we were falling apart. Growing up, she taught me that strength did not mean being loud, and dignity did not mean being cold. It meant knowing your worth even when other people tried to make you forget it. Our bond only grew stronger as I got older. Even after I moved into my own apartment in downtown Boston and started building my career as a marketing executive, I called her almost every day. She was my confidant, my advisor, my reality check, and my biggest supporter. So when she was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 8 months before the funeral, my world collapsed all over again. The treatments were aggressive, exhausting, and ultimately, not enough. We all knew time was running out, but my mother faced it with more grace than anyone should have to summon. Even in pain, she worried more about us than herself. In her final weeks, she stayed in the home where she had raised Odora and me, surrounded by family, old photographs, soft blankets, and the quiet sounds of people trying not to cry too loudly. She passed away holding my hand, and one of the last things she told me was that she believed I would find peace. 6 years before that diagnosis, when I was 31, my life looked perfect from the outside. I had a strong career, loyal friends, a beautiful apartment, and a schedule so full that most people assumed I was too busy to notice what was missing. But I noticed. I worked 62-hour weeks, dated occasionally, and told myself I was fine, but nothing ever became real. Then, through my college friend Alina, I met Darius Rowan at a charity event. Darius was the kind of man people noticed before he even said a word. He was charming, polished, confident, and he had a smile that made people feel like they had been chosen. At 37, he was already a self-made tech millionaire, the sort of success story magazines love to write about. Our connection felt instant. We both loved art, travel, ambitious goals, and long conversations about the kind of life we wanted to build. After our first date at an expensive restaurant overlooking the water, I called my mother before I even got home. "Mom," I said, practically breathless, "I met someone special." And for a while, he really did seem special. Our relationship moved fast, but it did not feel reckless at the time. There were weekends in Martha's Vineyard, symphony performances, exclusive dinners, thoughtful gifts, and elaborate dates that made me feel cherished. After 16 months, Darius proposed during a private dinner on a yacht in Boston Harbor. The ring was a 6-carat diamond that sparkled like something from a magazine spread. I said yes without hesitation. My parents were thrilled, especially my mother. She immediately began imagining the perfect wedding, and because Darius had the money to make almost anything possible, she insisted we should not hold back. Then there was my younger sister, Odora. She was only 2 years younger than me, but our relationship had always been complicated. When we were children, we could be close, even inseparable at times, but there was always an undercurrent of competition. If I had something, she wanted it. If I made a friend, she needed that friend to like her more. If I earned praise, she had to find a way to match it or surpass it. My mother tried to keep the peace by making each of us feel seen in our own way, but even she could not erase the pattern. Still, when I got engaged, I chose Odora as my maid of honor. My mother thought it might bring us closer, and I wanted to believe that as adults, we had outgrown the childish jealousy that used to follow us around the house. When I introduced Odora to Darius at a family dinner, she was bright, funny, and full of compliments. I noticed the way she touched his arm while laughing at his jokes, but I dismissed it as her usual charm. Odora had always known how to fill a room. Later, at our engagement party at my parents' colonial-style home, she helped my mother hang fairy lights and arrange flowers. Throughout the evening, I caught her watching Darius from across the room, but whenever our eyes met, she would smile quickly and raise her glass at me, as if she were only being supportive. After the engagement party, while guests were leaving and my mother was carefully packing away leftover appetizers in the kitchen, she looked at me and said, "Wendy, dear, I noticed your sister seems quite taken with Darius." I laughed it off because the alternative felt too ugly to consider. "She's just being friendly, Mom. Besides, she's dating that pharmaceutical rep, Edric." My mother nodded, but she did not look convinced. "Just be careful, honey," she said softly. "You know how your sister can get when she sees something she wants." I kissed her cheek and told her everything was fine. "We're adults now, Mom. Odora is happy for me, I'm sure of it. I wish I could go back to that kitchen and shake myself. I wish I could tell that younger version of me that my mother's instincts were right." 3 months before the wedding, I started noticing changes in Darius. At first, they were small enough to explain away. He worked later than usual, answered texts at odd hours, and blamed international clients and product launches. Our Friday date nights were suddenly canceled because of emergency meetings. When we were together, he seemed distracted, always checking his phone, giving me half of his attention while pretending it was all of it. Then he began criticizing things he used to say he loved about me. My laugh was suddenly too loud in public. My favorite blue dress, the one he had once called beautiful, now made me look washed out. Even my habit of reading before bed, which he had once found sweet, became irritating because the light kept him awake. At the same time, Odora started calling me more often, always asking about wedding details. "I just want everything to be perfect for my big sister," she would say, even though my mother was doing most of the planning. Odora volunteered to attend vendor meetings when work kept me away. She offered to help with flowers, menus, and scheduling. I wanted to see it as kindness. I wanted to believe she was finally showing up for me. Then one Thursday evening, Darius and I went to dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant. He barely looked at me. I told him about work, and he answered with one-word replies. When his phone buzzed for the 5th time, I could not hide my frustration anymore. "Is there something more important going on somewhere else?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light, even though my chest felt tight. He put his phone face down and said, "Sorry, just work stuff. You know how things get before a product launch." Later that week, while doing laundry, I noticed an unfamiliar perfume on his collar. It was floral, heavy, and nothing like the faint scent I wore. When I asked him about it, he said he had been in meetings all day with a potential investor named Wendy Mills, who apparently wore strong perfume and had hugged him goodbye. It sounded plausible enough that I felt foolish for questioning him. The next morning, I met Alina for coffee and told her my concerns. She stirred her cappuccino and said, "Every relationship gets weird before a wedding. Parker and I fought constantly the month before ours, and we've been married 5 years, but the knot in my stomach refused to loosen." My mother noticed it too. At our weekly dinner, she reached across the table and touched my hand. "You seem distracted, sweetheart. Wedding stress or something else?" I forced a smile and said I was only overwhelmed with final arrangements. "Everything is fine," I told her. But everything was not fine. I began trying harder because some part of me wondered whether I had been taking Darius for granted. I scheduled a spa day. I bought new lingerie. I tried cooking his favorite meals. The harder I tried, the more distant he became. Then came the cake tasting appointment, something Darius had supposedly been excited about for weeks. That morning, he called and said he had an unexpected meeting with investors. "Odora can go with you," he said casually. "She knows my preferences anyway." After I hung up, I sat there feeling sick. How did my sister know my fiancé's cake preferences better than I did? Still, I let her come. The next day, while cleaning Darius's car before a dinner party, I found a silver earring trapped between the passenger seat and the center console. It had a tiny sapphire dangling from it. I recognized it immediately. It was Odora's. She had worn the same earrings to my engagement party, a gift from our grandmother. When I showed Darius the earring that night, his expression barely changed. "Oh, your sister must have dropped it when I drove her to the florist last week," he said smoothly. "She mentioned losing one." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "You never told me you drove Odora to the florist," he shrugged. "Didn't I? It must have slipped my mind. It wasn't important." When I called Odora, her story matched his almost too perfectly. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "I've been looking everywhere for that earring." Darius was kind enough to drive me because my car was in the shop. That night, I could not sleep. My mind kept circling the same questions. Had they rehearsed that explanation? Was I being paranoid? Was stress turning me into someone suspicious and unreasonable? My weight started dropping. Dark circles appeared under my eyes. I began seeing a therapist without telling Darius because I was afraid he would use it as proof that I was unstable. 3 weeks before the wedding, Darius suggested postponing. "I'm worried about you, Wendy," he said. "You haven't been yourself lately. Maybe we're rushing things." I broke down. I begged him to tell me what I had done wrong, what had changed, how I could fix it. He held me and promised everything was all right, but his eyes were empty. That night, I woke up at 3 in the morning and realized his side of the bed was empty. From the hallway, I heard his voice whispering from the guest bedroom. "Not now. She'll hear us. I know. Soon, I promise." The next day, I decided to surprise him with lunch at his office. My father, Kelsey, called while I was leaving my apartment. "Wendy, are you eating properly?" he asked. "Your mother says you've lost too much weight. We're worried." I told him I was fine, that it was only pre-wedding nerves, and that I was bringing Darius lunch. My father sighed and said, "Good." That boy better be treating my daughter like a queen. I almost laughed because I still wanted that to be true. The security guard at Darius's building recognized me and waved me through. In the elevator up to the 12th floor, I checked my reflection and tried to smooth the worry lines forming between my brows. In my hand was a lunch bag with his favorite sandwich from the deli near my office. When I reached the reception area, Darius's secretary, Morel, looked up from her computer and her eyes widened. "Wendy," she said, "we weren't expecting you today." Her gaze flicked toward Darius's closed office door, then back to me. "Darius is in a meeting right now." I lifted the bag. "That's okay. I just brought him lunch. I can wait." She stood quickly, blocking my path. "Actually, he specifically asked not to be disturbed. Maybe I can let him know you're here." Something about her nervousness told me more than her words did. I looked at her and asked, "Is he alone in there, Muriel?" Her hesitation answered for her. Before she could stop me, I stepped around her and opened the office door. I will never forget what I saw. Darius was leaning against his desk with his hands on my sister's waist. Odora's arms were wrapped around his neck, and they were kissing like two people who had done it many times before. For a few terrible seconds, neither of them noticed me, and those seconds gave me enough time to see every detail. Her skirt was pushed up, his tie was loose. Their bodies had the easy familiarity of people who were not making a mistake for the first time. When the door clicked behind me, they sprang apart. 3 of us froze in that office, trapped inside the truth. Darius reacted first, adjusting his tie as if he could straighten himself back into innocence. "Wendy," he said, "this isn't what it looks like." Odora did not even bother with such a useless lie. She lifted her chin and said, "We didn't plan this. It just happened." The strangest part was the calm that came over me. I did not scream. I did not throw the lunch bag. I simply asked, "How long?" Darius looked at Odora, then back at me. "Wendy, let's talk about this privately," I repeated. "How long?" Odora answered for him. "For months. Since the engagement party. For months. Nearly half of our engagement. While I was choosing invitations, tasting cakes, approving flowers, and imagining a life with him, they had been betraying me behind my back." Darius moved behind his desk, putting physical distance between us, as if he were preparing for a difficult business negotiation, instead of explaining why he had destroyed me. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said. "Sometimes feelings change. I was going to tell you after I cut him off." "After what? After the wedding? After our honeymoon?" His voice took on that polished smoothness he used with difficult clients. I was trying to find the appropriate moment. The lunch bag slipped from my hand and hit the floor. "I trusted you both," I said. "Both of you." Odora at least had the decency to look ashamed for a moment. "It just happened, Becca. We tried to fight it." Hearing my childhood nickname from her mouth felt like another violation. "Do not call me Becca," I said. "And nothing just happens. For 5 months, you made choices. Every secret call, every lie, every time you looked me in the eye knowing exactly what you were doing." Darius pressed the intercom button. "Morel, please come in." When his secretary entered, avoiding my eyes, he said, "Please escort Wendy out. She's upset." I stood taller, even though something inside me had shattered. "I'm escorting myself out," I said. "You deserve each other." The tears came in the elevator. By the time I reached my car, I could barely breathe through my sobs. The drive home was a blur. I remember calling my mother from my apartment, curled on the bathroom floor, unable to form complete sentences because I was crying so hard. My mother and father arrived within an hour, using their emergency key when I could not bring myself to open the door. My mother held me while I told them everything. My father paced the living room, his face growing redder with every detail. "I'll kill him," he muttered, clutching his chest. "Kelsey, your blood pressure," my mother warned, though her own face was full of fury. The days after that were a haze of humiliation and grief. My mother helped me contact vendors and cancel wedding arrangements. My father handled the financial mess. I returned the engagement ring to Darius's apartment by leaving it with the doorman because I could not stand the thought of seeing him. Odora had already started moving in. Her things were scattered around his apartment, and family photos had been placed on shelves where mine used to sit. Darius sent a cold email about dividing our shared assets, and he mentioned that Odora had helped catalog my remaining belongings. That was when I realized the betrayal had gone deeper than the affair itself. They had not merely fallen in love behind my back. They had quietly erased me while I was still planning to marry him. Through mutual friends, I learned even more. Darius and Odora had been meeting whenever I worked late or traveled for business. Odora had deliberately created reasons to be alone with him. She had sent texts, photos, and flirtatious messages when I was not around. The scandal spread quickly through our social circle. Some people supported me, but others sided with Darius because he had power in the business world. A few admitted they had seen Darius and Odora flirting before everything came out, but they had chosen not to get involved. Their cowardice hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. During those dark months, my mother became my lifeline. She brought me food when I could not eat, listened to me cry, and stayed overnight when the loneliness became unbearable. She also kept trying, in her gentle but misguided way, to keep the family from breaking completely. She invited both Odora and me to family dinners, hoping grief and anger might soften into something else. Instead, Those dinners became torture. At one of them, when I refused to pass Odora the salt, she snapped. "You always got everything first, Wendy. The grades, the job, the apartment. For once, I got something before you did." My voice cracked when I answered. My fiancé was not a prize to be won. He was the man I loved and trusted. My mother set down her fork hard enough to make everyone flinch. "Odora Marie Thompson, apologize to your sister right now." Odora folded her arms. "For what?" Being honest, Darius chose me. He loves me now. I stood, placed my napkin on my plate, and said, "I can't do this anymore. Mom, I'm sorry." That was the last family dinner I attended with Odora. The stress of his daughter's feud worsened my father's heart problems. He needed medication adjustments and more doctor appointments. My mother seemed to age in months, the lines around her eyes deepening as she tried to hold together a family that no longer knew how to sit in the same room. 6 months after I caught Darius and Odora in that office, I hit rock bottom. My therapist diagnosed me with depression and suggested medication. Work suffered because I could not focus. I eventually lost a major client after a disastrous presentation where I broke down in tears. My supervisor recommended a leave of absence, but I knew that staying in Boston, surrounded by memories on every street and whispers behind every polite smile, would only keep me trapped. When a marketing director position opened at our Chicago branch, I applied immediately. The interview went surprisingly well, probably because my desperation for change came across as ambition. 2 weeks later, I got the offer. My mother helped me pack my apartment, wrapping photos and fragile keepsakes in tissue paper. As we sorted through my belongings, she asked the question that had been hovering between us. "Will you ever consider forgiving Odora?" I kept folding sweaters without looking up. "I don't know, Mom. Not now. Maybe not ever." She sealed a box with packing tape and said quietly, "Forgiveness is not about them deserving it. It is about freeing yourself." I answered, "I am freeing myself. I'm moving to Chicago." She sat beside me on the bed and took my hands. "Running away is not the same as healing, sweetheart." Tears filled my eyes. "I need space to even begin to heal. Can you understand that?" She nodded and pulled me into a hug. "Promise you'll call. Promise you won't shut us out completely." I promised. Saying goodbye to my parents was harder than I expected. My father held me longer than usual, his voice rough when he said, "You show them, kiddo. Build a life so good they choke on their regret." My first weeks in Chicago were lonely and full of doubt. My small apartment felt sterile and unfamiliar. I worked long hours to avoid going home to empty rooms. I ate takeout at my desk and fell asleep exhausted every night. Then my mother called one Sunday morning with the news that drove the knife in deeper. Her voice was hesitant as she said, "Wendy, I think you should hear this from me before you see it on social media. Odora and Darius got married yesterday." Because of Darius's business connections, their small civil ceremony made it into the Boston Magazine Society pages. The photo showed them smiling outside the courthouse. Odora wore a simple white dress, and my former engagement ring was visible on her finger. That night became my lowest point. I drank an entire bottle of wine alone, scrolled through old photos of Darius and me, and cried until my eyes were swollen shut. I called in sick the next day because I could not face the world. But during those lonely hours, something shifted. As morning light seeped through my blinds, I made a decision. That would be the last day I allowed them to control my happiness. I deleted every photo of Darius from my phone. I blocked both him and Odora on social media. Then I stood under a long, hot shower and imagined the pain washing down the drain. At work, I forced myself to focus again. My boss noticed the change and began assigning me bigger clients. Slowly, I built a reputation in the Chicago office for creativity, discipline, and resilience. Maricel, our HR director, became my first real friend in the city. She introduced me to her book club, and through her, I met other women who eventually became my social circle. Maricel tried repeatedly to set me up on dates, but I always refused. The idea of being vulnerable with another man still terrified me. 4 months after moving to Chicago, I was assigned to represent our company at a technology conference in San Francisco. On the second evening, I attended a business dinner with potential clients and ended up sitting beside Zevian Forrester, a tech investor and entrepreneur who had recently moved from Seattle. Zevian was different from Darius in every way. Darius had been flashy, charming, and eager to dominate every room. Zevian was quiet, thoughtful, and steady. He drew people in without demanding attention. When he spoke about his work, his passion was clear, but he never bragged. He asked thoughtful questions and listened to the answers. After dinner, he asked for my card. I gave it to him with no expectations. To my surprise, he emailed the next morning and asked if I wanted to continue our conversation about digital marketing trends over coffee. Over the next 3 months, our contact stayed mostly professional. He sent clients to my agency, and I introduced him to people in my Chicago network. Maricel noticed our regular business lunches and raised her eyebrows. "He likes you, Wendy," she said, "and not just professionally." I insisted we were only colleagues. She laughed and said, "Colleagues do not look at each other the way he looks at you." Eventually, Zevian invited me to dinner somewhere that had nothing to do with work. I panicked and almost canceled twice, but I forced myself to go. 20 minutes into the date, while we were talking about our favorite books, I had a full panic attack. My hands shook. My breathing went shallow. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. Instead of looking embarrassed or annoyed, Zevian stayed calm. He spoke gently, sat with me, and helped me breathe until the room stopped spinning. He drove me home without pressure, without questions, and without making me feel like a burden. The next day, flowers arrived at my office with a note that said, "No pressure, no expectations. I hope you're feeling better, Zevian." That evening, I called him and told him everything about Darius and Odora. He listened without interrupting. Then he told me his own story. His previous marriage had ended when his wife left him for his business partner and took half of their joint company in the divorce. "Broken trust leaves scars," he said. "Anyone worth your time will understand that healing is not linear." Over the next few months, we built a friendship before anything else. Zevian never asked for more than I could give. He respected my boundaries while still showing up consistently. For our 5th date, he cooked dinner at his apartment instead of taking me to a crowded restaurant because he knew crowds could make me anxious. When fear flared up, he knew how to help me through it. For the first time since Darius, I began to believe trust might be possible again. 1 year after I moved to Chicago, I barely recognized myself. I had been promoted to senior marketing director, with a corner office overlooking the river. My circle of friends had grown beyond Maricel into a small but loyal group of women who knew the real me. And most surprising of all, I had fallen deeply in love with Zevian. His love was nothing like Darius's dramatic, expensive, attention-grabbing romance. Zevian's love showed itself in steady, thoughtful ways. He remembered tiny details, like my preference for oat milk in my coffee and which true crime podcasts I liked. He respected my independence while offering support I never had to beg for. Most importantly, he never compared me to anyone or tried to reshape me into a version of myself that served his ego. I met his sister Giselle when she visited from Portland, and we bonded quickly, exchanging phone numbers and building our own connections separate from him. She told me stories about their childhood in Seattle, painting a picture of the boy who had grown into the man I loved. My relationship with my parents continued from a distance. I called my mother weekly and skillfully changed the subject whenever Odora came up. My father sometimes joined those calls, his gruff voice softening as he told me he was proud of my new beginning. I visited Boston twice that year, carefully timing my trips for when Odora and Darius would be away. My mother occasionally gave updates anyway. Their marriage looked perfect on social media. Odora posted pictures of luxury vacations, charity galas, and a large Beacon Hill property they were renovating. During one call, my mother said, "Odora asks about you sometimes." I stirred pasta sauce on my stove and asked, "What do you tell her?" My mother answered, "That you're doing well, that you're building a new life." I asked, "Does she ever sound sorry?" My mother sighed. "She gets quiet when your name comes up." I continued therapy in Chicago, learning how to process betrayal without letting it define every choice I made. I learned to recognize my triggers, communicate my fears, and stop blaming myself for someone else's deception. The nightmares about Darius and Odora faded slowly. That June, Zevian surprised me with a weekend trip to Michigan's wine country. We stayed at a charming bed and breakfast, surrounded by vineyards, spent afternoons tasting wine, and watched sunsets over Lake Michigan. For the first time in years, I felt fully present. Not numb, not guarded, not waiting for the floor to collapse beneath me. On our last evening, we walked through the Chicago Botanic Garden beneath a trellis covered in climbing roses. Zevian stopped, took both my hands, and said, "Wendy, this past year, knowing you has been the greatest gift of my life." When he knelt and took a ring box from his pocket, panic flashed through me. Images of Darius's proposal tried to intrude. The yacht, the diamond, the version of myself who thought yes meant safety. But when I looked into Zevian's eyes, all I saw was sincerity. He sensed my hesitation and said, "I am not asking for an answer today. I just want you to know that whenever you are ready, whether that is tomorrow or next year, I will be here." My eyes filled with tears. But this time, they were not tears of fear. "Yes," I whispered, "I'm ready now." The ring looked nothing like the extravagant diamond Darius had given me. It was a simple emerald with small diamonds on either side, delicate and understated, just like the love we had built. That night, I called my parents to tell them. My mother cried happy tears and said, "He sounds wonderful, darling. When can we meet him?" I promised it would be soon. We planned a small wedding for 30 guests at a historic venue in Chicago. At my mother's request, I sent an invitation to Odora, not because I expected her to attend, but because my mother believed gestures mattered, even when people were not ready to accept them. Odora's response came by email, quick and cold. "Congratulations on the engagement. Unfortunately, Darius and I have other engagements that day. Best wishes for the future." My mother was disappointed, but not shocked. "Give her time, Wendy," she said. "This is progress compared to where you both were." Our wedding day was intimate and joyful. My parents were there, along with my new friends and Zevian's family. My father walked me down the aisle and whispered, "I haven't seen you this happy in years, kiddo." Zevian's vows reflected everything we had survived. He said, "Wendy, I promise to remember that love is both strong and fragile, requiring care and commitment every day. I promise to be worthy of the trust you have given me, knowing how precious and hard-won that gift is. We built our life in Chicago, buying a brownstone and renovating it together. My career continued to rise until I became a vice president. Zevian's investment firm expanded, with a focus on female-led technology startups. During a dinner with business associates, I heard something that unexpectedly connected my past to my present. A venture capitalist mentioned working with Darius years earlier and said, "Rowan?" Yes, he and Forrester had quite a rivalry in the angel investing space about 7 years back. Forrester backed the right startup. Rowan backed the competitor. Forrester's pick was acquired for millions. Rowan's went bankrupt. Later that night, I asked Zevian about it. He admitted, "I was going to tell you eventually. I knew who you were when we met at that conference. Not the details of what happened, but I knew you had been engaged to Rowan." I asked why he had not said anything. He answered, "I wanted you to know me for me, not as someone connected to your past." I was not angry. Somehow, the strange symmetry felt almost cosmic. 2 years into our marriage, Zevian and I began trying for a baby. Months passed without success, which led to fertility specialists, tests, procedures, and difficult conversations about what family might look like for us. Zevian was steady through every disappointment. He held me through tears and reminded me that family could take many forms. Then came my mother's diagnosis. Zevian and I flew to Boston immediately. We met with doctors, helped my father understand treatment options, and tried to absorb words nobody ever wants to hear. My mother put on a brave face, but the cancer was advanced and had spread. I took a leave from work and temporarily moved back into my childhood home to care for her. Zevian flew in every weekend to support both me and my father, whose own health seemed to bend under the weight of losing the woman he had loved for decades. In those final weeks, my mother and I had long conversations about life, love, and family. One evening, as I adjusted her pillows, she brought up Odora. Her voice was weak, but her determination was still there. "I wish you girls could find peace with each other," she whispered. "Life is too short for such distance between sisters." I swallowed tears and said, "I know, Mom." She looked at me with the same eyes that had seen through every lie since I was a child. "Promise me you'll try, Wendy. Not for her, but for yourself. And maybe a little for your old mother." I promised, though I was not sure I could keep it. I only knew I wanted to give her peace. 3 days later, my mother died quietly with Zevian, my father, and me at her bedside. Afterward, I called Odora directly for the first time in years. When she answered, I said, "Mom's gone." Her sharp inhale was the only sound for several seconds. Then she said, voice breaking, "I'll be there in an hour." Odora arrived at our parents' house, and we shared a brief, awkward hug before turning our attention to my father and the funeral arrangements. Grief forced us into the same rooms, but it did not erase what had happened. The real test came the morning of my mother's funeral. The day was dark and drizzly, as if the sky understood the occasion. I stood in front of the mirror in my childhood bedroom, adjusting my black dress and wondering how I would survive the day. Zevian stood behind me in his dark suit and placed his hands gently on my shoulders. "I'm right beside you today," he said, meeting my eyes in the reflection. "Whatever happens downstairs." My father sat at the kitchen table, staring at untouched coffee. The previous week had hollowed him out. At 72, he looked as if he had aged a decade since my mother's diagnosis. I touched his shoulder and asked softly, "Ready, Dad?" He nodded slowly and said, "Your mother always said funerals aren't for the dead, they're for the living." I never understood that until now. When we arrived at the funeral home, it was already filling with extended family, neighbors, old friends, and people I barely recognized. I stayed close to my father, accepting condolences with polite smiles that felt like they belonged to someone else. Cousins from California, my mother's college friends, neighbors from the house where my parents had lived for 40 years, all of them came carrying memories. My great-aunt Cheryl touched my cheek and said, "You look just like your mother at your age. She would be proud of the woman you've become." Another friend asked how I had been and whether I still lived in Chicago. I said yes, without explaining that my sister's betrayal was the reason I had moved there in the first place. As I led my father to the front row, with Zevian on his other side, a murmur rippled through the room. I turned and saw Odora and Darius entering together. Heads turned, whispers spread. Odora wore an elegant black dress that emphasized her thin frame, with diamond earrings catching the light. Darius looked uncomfortable in a beautifully tailored suit, his arm around her waist in a carefully staged show of support. Her left hand rested conspicuously on her purse, making the huge diamond engagement ring and wedding band impossible to miss. My father stiffened beside me. I whispered, "Dad, breathe," because I was genuinely afraid for his heart. Odora and Darius made their way forward slowly, pausing to speak with other attendees. I kept my eyes on the large portrait of my mother beside the closed casket, letting her warm smile steady me. Eventually, they reached the front. Odora hugged my father, and he returned it stiffly. Darius shook his hand and received only a short nod. Then Odora turned to me. "Wendy," she said, wearing an expression I could not read. "It's been a long time." "It's been..." I answered simply, "Yes." Darius gave me a hesitant nod. "Sorry for your loss." Zevian had stepped away to speak with the funeral director. leaving me alone with them. Odora seized the opportunity. "I need to speak with you privately," she said, gesturing toward a side room. Against my better judgment, I followed her because I did not want a scene at my mother's funeral. The small room had a few chairs and a box of tissues, clearly meant for mourners who needed a private place to break down. Odora closed the door behind us. Up close, I noticed fine lines around her eyes that her expensive makeup could not completely hide. She looked me over and said, "You look thin." I answered flatly, "Grief does that." She twisted her ring around her finger and said, "Darius and I bought a summer house on Cape Cod last month. 8 bedrooms, private beach access. We're thinking about starting a family soon. Darius's company just acquired 2 startups, and we're renovating the 3rd floor for a nursery." I said, "Congratulations," with no emotion in my voice. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss about the funeral arrangements?" Her smile sharpened. "I just thought you might want to know how well we're doing. Poor you, still alone at 38. I got the man, the money, and the mansion." The familiar pain flared for a second, then disappeared almost immediately. 6 years earlier, those words would have destroyed me. That day, they sounded desperate. I smiled, genuinely and calmly. "Have you met my husband yet?" I opened the door and saw Zevian standing nearby. "Come meet my sister," I said. As Zevian entered the room, Darius appeared behind him, apparently having noticed our conversation. The moment the 2 men made eye contact, Darius's face went pale. "Forrester," he murmured, all of his confidence draining away. Zevian's tone was professional but cold. "Rowan, it's been 7 years? Not since Macintosh acquired Initech instead of your client Compervay, right?" Darius swallowed visibly. "You 2 are married?" I slid my hand into Zevian's and said, "2 wonderful years now." Odora's voice came out softer. "Zevian Forrester? As in Forrester Investments?" Zevian answered, "The same. Wendy and I met at a tech conference in San Francisco." Darius tried to recover. "Forrester, we should catch up sometime. I've been meaning to reach out about potential collaborations." Zevian smiled politely. "My schedule is quite full, but you can contact my office if you'd like." The funeral director appeared and told us the service was about to begin. When we returned to the main room, whispers followed us. The connection between Zevian and Darius was apparently well known in business circles, and people were beginning to put the pieces together. We had barely taken our seats when my father clutched his chest, his face twisting with pain. "Dad!" I cried, while Zevian immediately called for help. We moved my father into a private room, and the funeral was temporarily delayed. A doctor among the guests examined him and said it was most likely stress rather than another heart attack. Odora followed us with genuine concern on her face. "Is he okay? Should we call an ambulance?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The doctor says he's stable," I said, surprised by how sincere she seemed. "Just overwhelmed." For 20 minutes, we sat in awkward silence, connected only by fear for our father. When he insisted the service continue, we returned to the main room, and the brief crisis created an unexpected truce. The funeral itself was both beautiful and devastating. I gave a eulogy that focused on my mother's kindness, courage, and unwavering love for her family. When Odora rose to speak after me, she managed only a few sentences before her voice cracked and her eyes filled with tears. Without thinking, I stepped beside her and rested my hand gently on her back. "It's okay," I whispered. "Take your time." She composed herself and finished her tribute with stories from our childhood, memories that brought tears and soft laughter from the room. At the cemetery, as we laid my mother to rest, a light rain fell around us. I noticed Darius standing apart from the family, checking his watch again and again. Odora stayed near my father, her earlier swagger replaced by real grief. The reception at my parents' house was filled with casseroles, condolences, and stories about my mother. Darius drank heavily, and his uneasiness became impossible to miss as several business associates pulled Zevian into animated conversations. I overheard fragments about Darius's company struggling, failed acquisitions, and money problems. For the first time, I wondered whether Odora's bragging had been less about triumph and more about covering cracks. Throughout the day, I tried to hold the dignity my mother would have expected from me. I focused on supporting my father and honoring her memory, not on reopening old wounds. As guests began to leave, I saw Odora watching me from across the room. Her expression was unreadable, but softer than it had been that morning. The next day, Zevian had an important board meeting in Chicago. As he packed his overnight bag, he asked, "Are you sure you'll be okay if I go? I can reschedule." I shook my head. "Dad needs help sorting through Mom's things. I should stay a few more days. I'll be fine." After I dropped Zevian at the airport, I returned to my parents' house and found my father sitting in my mother's garden with a photo album open on his lap. "She labeled everything," he said, showing me her careful handwriting beneath each picture. "She said someday we'd appreciate knowing who was who." That afternoon, I began the painful task of sorting through my mother's closet. Every dress carried a memory. The blue one she wore to my college graduation, the floral print she loved for Sunday brunches, the elegant gray dress she wore to my engagement celebration. I found myself talking to her as I worked, telling her about Chicago, my job, and my life with Zevian, as if she were sitting on the bed listening. In her nightstand drawer, I found a soft leather-bound journal. My mother had been writing in it for the past 10 years. Many entries were about her daughters, her hopes for our reconciliation, and her heartbreak over the distance between us. The last entry was dated only 2 weeks before she died. It said, "My greatest regret is leaving with my girls still estranged. I always fix things, but I could not fix this. I pray they find their way back to each other somehow." I was wiping away tears when the doorbell rang. Through the front window, I saw Odora standing alone on the porch. There was no sign of Darius's car in the driveway. My father had gone to his brother's house for dinner, leaving me alone with my sister. I opened the door, unsure what to expect. "Hi," she said simply. "Can I come in?" In the kitchen, I made coffee while she sat quietly at the table, without Darius beside her. She looked different. Smaller, less polished, less armored. Finally, I set a mug in front of her and asked, "Where's Darius?" She wrapped her hands around the mug but did not drink. "At home. He doesn't know I'm here." Silence stretched between us, heavy with years of things neither of us had said. At last, she whispered, "I'm sorry about yesterday. What I said in that room at the funeral home was cruel and completely inappropriate." I nodded, acknowledging the apology without instantly accepting it. She continued, "I saw Mom's journal. Dad showed it to me last night. Her last wish was for us to reconcile." I said, "I found it too. But reconciliation takes more than proximity, Odora. It requires honesty." She looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "You want honesty? Here it is. I'm miserable, Wendy. I have been almost since the beginning. Then the dam broke." Words poured out between sobs. Darius had changed quickly after their wedding. He had become controlling, critical, and domineering. His company had been failing for years, and each new acquisition was not a victory, but an attempt to keep a sinking ship above water. The mansion, the cars, the vacations, even the Cape Cod house were financed with mounting debt. Their marriage was a carefully maintained performance for business contacts and social status. "He monitors my spending," she said. "He checks my phone. He questions every movement I make. The Darius you knew does not exist anymore. Maybe he never did." I asked, "Why stay?" She answered immediately, "Shame. How could I admit what I did to you? How could I admit I destroyed our family for something that turned out to be a mirage? And then there is the prenup. If I leave with nothing." I pushed my mother's journal across the table. "Read the rest of her entries." Odora cried harder as she read. When she finally looked up, her face was stripped bare. "She knew," she whispered. "She saw through everything." I nodded. "Mom always did." Odora covered her mouth and said, "I have hated myself for years. Every time Mom mentioned you, every time she proudly talked about your work or your life in Chicago, I felt what I had done. Wendy, I'm planning to leave him. I've been privately speaking with a lawyer." My emotions tangled together, vindication, anger, grief, and an unexpected tenderness I had not expected to feel. The sister who had caused me so much pain was facing consequences I would not wish on anyone. "I do not expect forgiveness," Odora said. "I do not deserve it, but I needed to tell you the truth before I blow up my life again." We spent the next several hours sorting through my mother's possessions together. It was not warm at first, but slowly, memories began to soften the room. Odora remembered how Mom taught us to bake cookies and never mix the batches, because I preferred chocolate chip and Odora liked sugar cookies. She laughed through tears and said, "Do you remember how she used to leave notes in our lunchboxes? Different messages every day?" I nodded. She never repeated one. We were not healed. Wounds that deep do not close in one afternoon over coffee and old photographs. But as dusk settled outside the kitchen windows, something shifted between us. My mother's love formed a fragile bridge over years of resentment. When Odora prepared to leave, I asked, "What will you do?" She stood by the doorway and said, "File for divorce when my lawyer says the timing is right. Rent a small apartment. Start over." Then she looked at me. "What about you? Will you go back to Chicago?" I said, "Yes, my life is there now with Zevian." She studied me for a moment and said, not quite asking, "You seem happy." I answered, "I am truly happy." Her eyes filled again. "I'm glad. One of us should be." We hugged quickly and awkwardly before she left. It was not forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. Back in Chicago, I returned to my life with Zevian, our brownstone, and the career I had built from the ruins of what I once lost. 6 months after my mother's passing, I found out I was pregnant. After years of trying, the joy was almost overwhelming, but it was touched by sadness because my mother would never hold her grandchild. Still, I felt her presence in quiet moments, in the way sunlight fell across the nursery floor, in the smell of coffee on early mornings, in the old recipes I suddenly wanted to make. Odora and I stayed in careful contact through phone calls. She filed for divorce and moved into a modest apartment. She started working at a small marketing agency and faced gossip and judgment in Boston's social circles. But for the first time in years, she seemed determined to rebuild a life that was real instead of impressive. The road that brought me here was not one I would have chosen. Losing Darius felt like the end of my world, but it was actually the beginning of a much better one. With Zevian, I found love, but also partnership, respect, and steady support. His success never overshadowed mine. It complemented it, and together we became stronger. My mother had been right when she said forgiveness was not about whether someone else deserved it. It was about freeing yourself from carrying their wrongs forever. The weight of anger and bitterness gradually lifted, leaving me able to see my past clearly and my future with hope. The scars remained, but they no longer defined me. As I sat in our nursery watching Zevian paint the walls a soft, calming green, I thought about everything I would one day teach our child: how loss can lead to discovery, how endings can make room for new beginnings, how the worst betrayals can still push you toward the life you were meant to build. My life had become richer, steadier, and more honest than I ever could have imagined during those broken days 6 years earlier. Not because betrayal made me stronger by itself, but because it forced me to rebuild with clearer eyes, deeper wisdom, and a heart that finally knew the difference between being chosen and being truly loved.